Today, we need to talk about something really difficult. We're going to open some of the darkest chapters in the history of science, moments when the drive for knowledge completely lost its moral compass, and human beings were treated not as people, but as raw material. And this really forces us to ask a fundamental question, one that's going to hang over everything we talk about today. Is any discovery, no matter how important, worth the price of human dignity? Just keep that in the back of your mind as we go through this. Let's begin. Now, you might think this is a pretty modern problem, right? But the conflict between medical progress and basic human rights, well, it goes back thousands of years to one of the ancient world's greatest centers of learning. We're in 4th century BC Alexandria, Egypt. This city is a beacon of knowledge, the home of the legendary library. And there are two physicians here, Herophilus and his student Erasistratus, who have a noble goal. They want to understand, to map, the human body. But their methods were anything but noble. The method they used has a specific, chilling name, vivisection. It comes from the Latin word vivus, which means alive. So, yeah, this wasn't about studying bodies that were already deceased. This was about cutting into living human beings to watch their organs function in real time. So how did they get their subjects? The ruler of Alexandria just supplied them with condemned criminals. And in public demonstrations, with absolutely no anesthetics, these people were dissected alive. They felt every single cut until they died from the excruciating pain or simply bled to death. For these victims, this wasn't science. This was state-sanctioned torture, plain and simple. Okay, let's fast forward to the 20th century. This is where things become even more systematic, more chilling. Because now, science wasn't just being driven by curiosity. It was being used as a weapon, a tool for political ideologies and military goals. So in 1921, a secret lab was set up by the Soviets. It was called Chimera, which is Russian for chamber. And its one and only purpose was terrifyingly specific: create poisons that could kill political enemies without leaving a single trace. The test subjects? They were prisoners from the gulags, people the state had already branded as enemies. And the worst part is they were told they were being given medicine. It was a complete betrayal. The poisons were all horrific, but for the lab, the holy grail was something they called C2. It was a poison that made a person just quietly fade away in about 15 minutes. The perfect political weapon. All of it built on deception and suffering. Now, right after World War II ended, another government-backed experiment began. This time, it was funded by the United States Public Health Service. On paper, the goal sounded good. Test how effective the new wonder drug penicillin was at preventing STDs. But the way they went about it was a profound violation of human rights. Over 1,300 people in Guatemala, and think about who they chose: orphans, soldiers, patients in psychiatric hospitals, the most vulnerable people they could find. They were all deliberately infected with diseases like syphilis and gonorrhea. Nobody asked for their consent. Nobody told them what was happening. They were just used. To really understand the human cost, you have to hear just one story. This is from a documented account of a woman in a psychiatric hospital named Berta. She had already been infected with syphilis and was near death. As she was dying, the doctor in charge deliberately infected her eyes and private parts with pus from gonorrhea and then reinfected her with syphilis again. This wasn't a search for knowledge anymore. It was just cruelty. Berta died a few days later. Okay, now we're entering the Cold War, a time of intense paranoia, where the fear of nuclear war was fueling a massive arms race. In 1954, out in the Marshall Islands, the U.S. tested its most powerful nuclear weapon ever, a bomb codenamed Castle Bravo. To give you a sense of the scale here, this explosion was 1,000 times stronger than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. 1,000. And it was way, way more powerful than the scientists had even predicted. The radioactive fallout was absolutely massive and totally out of control. And here is the absolutely unforgivable part. U.S. officials knew that 239 people were living on nearby islands, right in the fallout's path. Instead of evacuating them, they left them there. And they created Project 4.1, a top-secret project with one goal: to study the effects of radiation on living human beings. The cost was just devastating. Decades of sickness, birth defects, and cancer, all because they were seen as a convenient, non-consenting experiment. Of all the examples of state-sponsored atrocities, though, Few can match the pure, unadulterated horror of what happened at a facility in Japanese-occupied China. It was called Unit 731, a place where the idea of human experimentation was pushed to its absolute depraved limit.
You know, the first step to committing this kind of evil is always dehumanization. The staff at Unit 731 had a nickname for their prisoners. They called them maruta, which is the Japanese word for logs. The facility's official cover story was even that it was a lumber mill. This language made it easier to treat living, breathing men, women, and even children as if they were just objects.
The experiments themselves were just barbaric. Live dissections without any anesthesia, putting people in pressure chambers until their eyes burst, freezing their limbs solid and then thawing them to study frostbite. But what makes this even more disturbing, if that's possible, is that witnesses said many of these experiments had no real military or medical point. They were done out of a sick, twisted, professional curiosity, just to see what would happen. It was torture for torture's sake. So, what happens when all of this is over? When these horrors come to light, what are we supposed to do with the information they generated? This leads us to one of the most difficult ethical fights out there, especially when it comes to the data from Unit 731. Well, after the war, the United States found out exactly what Unit 731 had been doing. And they made a deal. The thinking was, this data is priceless. It tells us about biological weapons, about the limits of human endurance, things you could never find out through ethical research. So what was the price for this data? Immunity. The doctors, the scientists who did all of this, they were protected from war crimes trials in exchange for their research notes. Justice was traded for intelligence. You know, when you look back at all of these cases, from ancient Alexandria all the way to the 20th century, a really disturbing pattern starts to emerge. And it's a pattern we have to understand if we want to make sure it never, ever happens again. Here's the common thread, the lesson in all of this. Whenever a government, an ideology, or even just the abstract idea of progress becomes more important than an individual human life, atrocities like these become possible. The victims stop being people. They become subjects, data points, logs. Their dignity is seen as an acceptable price to pay for some greater goal. And that brings us right back to where we started. But now the question feels much heavier, doesn't it? We are left with this deeply unsettling dilemma. The data from these awful experiments, it exists. It is forever tainted by suffering. So if that data could help create a new vaccine or a treatment that could save lives right now, should we use it? Does using the data somehow justify what they did? Or does ignoring it mean that the victims suffered and died for absolutely nothing? There is no easy answer here.